We have a very special guest from United States, Miranda Cowley. Hi, Miranda. Thank you for being here with the Romanian public.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled, and I'm thrilled that it's being published in Romania. It's fantastic for me. So
it was published recently in the United States, right?
So it was published. Yeah, it was published last July, and then but then they're doing a new launch both in England for the paperback, and then the paperback's coming out here next week. So it's sort of launch. It's a new relaunch as well in both countries.
Okay. Yeah. We have the very fresh and new book from you, and as far as I know, it's your debut novel.
It is. It's my first novel.
So it's your first novel. Why did you wait so much? Because you come from a writer family, and I think this can be both inspiring and it can cause some kind of inhibitions or something.
Yeah, I think you? Yeah. I think, as you say, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Is how we say it.
It's a pressure, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when I always, in my mind, growing up, I wrote poetry as a small child, and I still do, and I was writing poetry before fiction. But in my mind, I always thought, of course I'm going to be a writer. That's my path. I did journalism, and then I was a magazine editor after I graduated.
Yes. That's why I asked you, because I know you write, so you do this.
Well, so basically, I think that you answered my question, which is to say that I had an enormous amount of pressure, and what that did to my writing when I tried to write fiction was that it made the fiction very self-conscious. So I was this part of my brain was writing, and I'm too much of a perfectionist I thought, well, I'm never going to do anything if I'm going to be embarrassed or it's not as good. I didn't have the kind of family where you could fail as a writer. So instead I started editing other writers, and I think it took me until I was in my late 40s before I could get out of my own way and write from a different part. And I do believe that came from going back to poetry very intensely. And poetry is so different. You access a different part of your brain. You're not purposefully digging for something. You are revealing things that you didn't expect to find. And that was what really made it possible for me to go back to this book, which I had started many years earlier, just the first, in my 40s, not that many, the first little section. And finally I went back, and I thought, well, either I'm going to do this in my life or I'm not. And then I did. And then I did, which I'm very happy I did.
And the book is brilliant. And in fact, my question was about why didn't you reveal it earlier? Because it's a great book, and it's good that it came to a light to the public. So
yeah, I mean, I wrote it in my 50s, so there was no, as soon as I finished it, I revealed it. But
thank you.
And thank you for saying nice things about it. I was very lucky because nobody was waiting for it, which meant that I could write what I wanted to write at the pace I wanted to write it. And so it took me a while to get it to where I knew I was happy with it. I had no idea if anybody else would understand it, but I knew that I was happy to put it into the world. And that's what was very important for me at the time, much less important now, because once you put a book into the world, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the readers, So, but it has been an amazing journey, of course, a dream come true. And especially in my 50s. So, yeah.
I think it's the beginning of a greater, even greater journey, because we are waiting for the next books. Of course, everybody is waiting now that you unleashed your talent and your great writing. What impressed me is that it is a smart book and also a page turner. In a way, these two things in my mind are two different things, and it's very rare that they come together. So this is one of the best things about your novel, in my opinion, is that it's very smart and very well built, and with great writing and also great style, and also it has attention that makes you want to read and read and read. It's a page turner. Did your experience as a book editor or in at HBO as a movie professional helped you to get this very good tension, to build good dialogues, to build extremely catching actions?
First of all, thank you. I would like to have you come and live with me and just sit and say nice things like that.
I will. But my baby has to come with me, so unfortunately.
So there's a couple of questions there in a way. I think a few things. One is, it is, of course, a literary novel, as you say, but even though you might not be aware of it at the beginning, of course, there is an emotional mystery that's quite subtle, but it is a mystery that's embedded from the beginning, which is, it's not a whodunit, but it's a whydunit. She's never slept with him in 35 years, right? Why last night? What happened the night before or the day before? And you sort of know unconsciously you're moving to that realization. And I think, to talk about film terms or television terms, that, to have what they call a ticking clock, right? There's quite literally a ticking clock, right, for the day. 6:30 a.m., 8:15, right? So you know that by the end of that clock, you're going to get your answer. So I think those things. I would also say, though, that I've always been a person, either as an editor or a television executive or a writer, or reader, indeed, that I like high-low, let's say. So I feel like with the shows that I worked on at HBO that really worked, had both qualities. It wasn't. I remember in my interview for HBO, and they said, "Well, why should we hire you?" And I said, "Because I read The New Yorker and People magazine."
Nice.
So I'm very interested. Like I myself am a person of zeitgeist, and then as well, I understand, literary material. So that's part of it. And then finally, I would just say that from working at HBO, for working in scripts, what I really didn't know how to do, what stopped me from writing novels earlier, I think, is I couldn't write dialogue. And I was really afraid of that. And in a way, that turned out to be a big surprise for me, which was that's the most fun. And I feel I can own that I think I love the dialogue in the novel because it's real. And that I learned from reading scripts, absolutely. People don't speak in questions and answers or call and response. People speak over one another. People ignore what the other person's saying. People repeat a word the other person used, right, without realizing it. And that kind of dialogue, I think, got into my head over all those years of reading scripts. So in that sense, definitely, yeah.
Very, very few writers know how to write a real dialogue, plausible dialogue, something which seems real. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. And it's a real irritation when I'm reading a book that I love and the author can't write dialogue. Yeah. And that happens a lot. And I just always think, well, why bother then? I mean, a soupçon of dialogue, right? You don't need a lot of dialogue, do you, necessarily, right? If you do what you're good at, right? Play to your strengths. Of course.
Yes.
So that was always one of those things where if you're leading the reader, honey, don't you remember when we got married in 1972? Right. And that at our wedding, do you remember this is not, it's not how people talk.
Yes, of course. It's obvious that you are a great reader too. Apart from being an author, we can see that you are a great reader too. And I was wondering if the present level of your novel, which happens in one day, has anything to do with Joyce's Ulysses.
Oh, I wish.
Because this is what it first came into my mind when I saw that this present level, just to say the Romanian public, the present level is about El Bishop who is married to Peter, happily married to Peter, and they have 3 children, and in a way there's something happening in this one particular day. She has a love episode with Jonas, who's her childhood soulmate. And
Right.
In fact, the novel is about this choice between 2 different types of love, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So were you thinking about Joyce, or why did you choose to put it in one day?
And 50 years, right?
And of course, the other
50
level,
years.
yes.
Well, first of all, I mean, Ulysses, thank you. No, that which is amazing. I would say actually the book that influenced me in that sense was, the writer was Virginia Woolf. And her novels that take place, to take place in a day inside a woman's head, really. I remember saying, if it were a better book, it would be to describe it, it would be a combination of Proust's Madeleine and Virginia Woolf. But of course, it's neither. But in any event, the choice, and this is, I think, something very important to me. Yes, of course, it's between 2 men. But really, it's not a story about that. I mean, it is. But in the sense that until the very end, yes, who's she going to choose? But also, it's learning, it's turning on its head, say, people's moral, you come in and you think, oh, she must be terrible. She did this thing. But as you learn what a life is and the complications of life and how every choice, small and large, lands you where you are. What I wanted to, and those choices aren't about the men per se, those choices are things she does, little things she doesn't expect to have done, and that lead her one way or another. And so I think there is a big concept of choice in it. And I also wanted the past to be not flashbacks, but in real time. So she's growing up and she's having her life is coming together. And by the time you get to the 24 hours, you get there the night before. So you take her life from a baby to the night before, to the evening she steps out and has her romantic thing with Jonas. And by then, I hope the reader understands and can't really decide themselves and understands that it's a dilemma. I think we've all had to make choices in different scenarios between 2 impossible choices between 2 equally, not just valid, but equally attractive, let's say, options. But in this case, it's 2 great loves that are completely different. And there's no bad choice, but there's no good choice. I mean, that's the flip of that. And so at the end, what do you do when you're faced with something like this? And your life depends on it, and your future depends on it. And so what I wanted was to raise those questions, but I didn't necessarily want to answer those questions because I don't know that they're answerable. I think there's a randomness to choice. You think you're going to do one thing, you've made up your mind, and then at the last second you change your mind, right? Or you don't. But it might be because, I don't know, you decide I'll take the job in Paris, but then as you're about to go to Paris, you realize, you hate that something. I don't know, you see a sign for a football team and you think, oh, no, I don't want to go to Paris. I'm just going to go there. I'm going to change my life and go that direction. And it can be triggered by these teeny things,
Yes.
Yeah.
But just before we met this evening, I tried to find the exact 2-3 lines from Tolstoy's novel Anna Karenina. I don't know if you remember, all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So in a way, this also came into my mind when I read your novel, which is also about family, about trauma, family, about generations that inherit one another's traumas and problems.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
yeah. And I think, yeah, absolutely. And so again, in terms of the inherited trauma, I mean, the women for me are very important in the novel. They're strong, but there are women who have all undergone traumas, and those are traumas that they've survived, but that have determined, in a certain way, the life of their child. Because if, whatever Elle's grandmother went through changed her in a way that affected Elle's mother, then what Elle's mother went through changed her in a way that raises the question, if it hadn't happened, if Wallace hadn't made the choices she made or gone through the traumas she went through, maybe she would have developed into a warmer person or a more accessible mother. And then when Elle went through her trauma, maybe she then would have told her mother. So the way we inherit, the way that even the love lives of our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents that can actually change the lives of every generation following is really fascinating, right? And their choices. So I did definitely, I loved that. And it's funny that you mentioned the Tolstoy, because of course that stayed with me completely. And I think there's actually a line in the book that is a direct nod to that when they're walking to a cocktail party at Dixon's. And I don't know if you caught it because it was very embedded, but they start to have a little argument. And she says, and Ella says, in her mind, she needs the family to be happy right now. She needs to decide that the happy family is what she wants. And I'll just read it because I just found it. It says,
please do.
He says, I know, she says, I know every fucking family is unhappy in its own fucking way, but right now, for a few years, I need happy family. So, the language is in there. I can't,
Yeah,
it's literally
it's an intertext.
Yeah, it's in there, but it's, so it's very much the Anna Karenina.
Yes. It's very much. And I remembered I have written here something from what Wallace says to Elle at one point. In my day, we simply divorced and remarried. So much simpler, refreshing even, like buying a new suit of clothes. And this is so different from the Romanian mentalities of the 70s, 80s, because in a communist, very close country, divorce was something outrageous. So our parents and our grandparents were forbidden to divorce.
Oh, really?
Because
wow.
It's
so
something like shame, or very few people divorced. And it was like a public shame to be.
Wow.
So people were unhappy, but refused to do this simple thing.
Wow.
Even refreshing. Like buying a new suit of clothes. So this is, you have to come to Romania, because you'll find here a different. Of course, young people are very different from my generation or my parents' generation, but in a way, it's nice to observe these different mentalities from one society to another. Of course, conditioned by history, by political things, and so on and so forth. So why?
There's a line that says, "Sorry, that in my mother's family, divorce is just a 7-letter word."
Yes, I remember.
Letters that could easily be replaced with "I'm bored" or "bad luck." Yeah.
Yes, I remember that. Yes. What's the message of this gathering of so much trauma and so much things about child being abused emotionally abused or physically abused even. Did you want to make a statement here to raise attention about something happening in our society, in our lives, because I think all families have trauma, and this is an evergreen subject. People from all around the world can read this novel without the cultural context, because this is very general, human general.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, no, I didn't set out to have any kind of a message, I will say that. But referencing the conversation about the trickle-down emotional economics of people's generations before. I was fascinated in that sense by how different generations of women dealt with such things. And, you know, for example, one of the things that came to mind, and it might sound very strange, with Wallace's mother, Nanette, was because I was reading Jane Austen again. I think I was rereading Pride and Prejudice, or maybe it was Sense and Sensibility. And the generation was so close, in fact. In other words, women couldn't work, and they were entirely dependent on men. And in a way, Nanette's family, by losing all their money, almost wanted to sell her to the highest bidder, right? And that would have been very traumatic for her, if even with nothing else. But without giving too much away, when she sees what's going on with her daughter, she doesn't really have a choice because she has nowhere to go. And she has no money of her own. And so when there's a slap in that scene, and to me that slap was a kind of the slap that you're describing of, you know, of women as they were, women as opposed to now, the kinds of choice we have now, but also that these things happen and they determine everything. So there's that. As far as the divorce piece, that was really important to me, because I mean, I come from a family of divorce, and I do think, again, it's sort of our parents' love life choices, but that there's a reason that kind of in Hansel and Gretel, or in the Grimm's, a lot of Grimm's fairy tales, you know, these little children get left to the side and in divorce. And so whatever one's position about divorce, without getting into any moral conversation about it at all, I did think that that was also a very interesting thing to examine truthfully, because, you know, leaving one's children is also going to be a huge piece of Elle's life if she chooses to do that after this long, long marriage. So what happens to Elle, which is really the main thing, of course, it was really hard to write, because for me, the most important thing was to be respectful to the horribleness and the truth of it, and without being either overblown or casual or anything. And she doesn't see it coming. And I know there's been a lot of controversy in my country about why weren't people told in advance, you know, trigger warnings. And I completely understand that their feelings, and I wouldn't have been against that. But the only thing in the novel is that in real life there aren't trigger warnings. And so for her experience to have verisimilitude, to be really truthful, it was important to me writing it to convey that truth as well. That what you don't see coming are the scariest things in a way, obviously, you know. It's why I'm more afraid of sharks than lions, let's say. I feel like if I saw something coming, I could deal with it, right? If somebody told me in advance. But if you don't see something coming, there's nothing you can do but respond. And that immediately changes you, let's say, from a strong person to a victim.
Yes, yes, right. I think I'll read the novel again, because this conversation it gives me a lot of insights different from things that I've perceived as a reader. And you said at the beginning that you wrote poetry, which is obvious in terms of nature descriptions and very subtle lines, like this one: Jonas is animal, Peter is mineral, and I need a rock. This is a line, a poetry line in a way. It's something else says, right?
Yes, yeah, and funnily enough, a lot of the poetry of mine that wasn't published, because otherwise I wouldn't do that. But a lot of things actually crept in, even if it was a little teensy piece. For example, I once wrote something about at the end of a marriage that all had to do with hummingbirds, and when I got to the very end of the novel. Yes. That came into my head. It was an old piece, but I went back and read it, and I changed it, of course. But there was, I think, one sentence that I just literally was able to lift from a poem because it was what made sense to me without having to explain anything. I hope it made sense to me as a way of explaining how. What I was talking about, how a feather on the steps can make you change your mind,
Yes, and nature, in a way, I saw it like nature and human nature.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are both characters in this very complex novel, The Paper Palace. I wanted to end this conversation with a question about this title, but nature and human nature, are they equally important in the novel?
I think they are. I think for Elle, I started with the place before I had the story or the characters. I knew this is a place that's very important to me, where I grew up, and where the 24 Hours takes place. And of course, I changed certain things, as one does, but I always have to say the story is completely made up, but the stage set is more or less real. So one of the things that happened without me really thinking about it was that I realized when I went back, the natural world often reflects Elle's internal world. So, she, when it's a very, very hot day is when she has very, very hot, sex with, or whatever. When there's the storm inside her, there's the storm outside her. When she needs to find a balance or a peace, she goes to the quiet of the woods, and so on. And that natural world, and indeed the camp itself, to the question of the paper palace, which I will get to, is very, very intertwined. And there's a line in the first page of the novel, I think, that tells you everything you need to know about Elle in one line or in one section, which is that she says she's desperately trying to get back to the safety of the shallows while she's swimming. She has a sudden moment of panic. And she gets back to the sandy bottom where she can see the sandy bottom and the safety of that. But that she also loves her thrumming heartbeat. She loves the panic, the excitement, and that's her relation to a pond, obviously, and swimming. But that's who she is. She needs both of those things. She loves both of those things, the excitement and the safety. And so that's almost at the very beginning telling you who she is through water, through water. In terms of the title, the camp that she's grown up in, this place, that they nicknamed the Paper Palace, is quite literally built of homosote, which is a kind of paper made up of tiny bits of pressed paper. And there it is, still standing decades later. And so, of course, for me, the novel is about Elle, and Elle finding her way back to herself and to her own right to make her own decisions and figure out her own life. But in a way, all these little teeny bits, the traumas, the things she's been through, the storms, the Paper Palace has been through without falling down, it's what Elle has been through. All these little bits of paper, and she's still there, she's still standing after the traumas. And in that sense, she's in its walls and it's in hers, but it's also, of course, a sort of recognition of who she is, and that that traumas, choices, bits and pieces, divorces, or whatever you go through, they still make you who you are. And in her case, a really strong woman. You know, and she's still standing, and she's going to keep standing, and that was the sort of Paper Palace title. Yeah.
My two favorite characters from your book are Wallace and Anna. These two amazing women are, of course, Elle. She's the main figure of the. But these two were the most appealing to me, inspired me the most, because they are in a way gentle but harsh and strong. And it's fascinating how people can be both very delicate and both very strong. What are yours?
My favorite characters? Well, so people often say, "Oh, well, are you Elle?" Or they'll make that assumption, and I say, "No, actually, the funny thing is, the character most like me is Anna, because I'm much more sort of full frontal, let's put it that way. I don't necessarily mince words." And whereas Elle, because of her life, has an observational quality to her. She's, of course, strong, but she's, you know, we understand how different she is from Anna because of what she went through, right? And so I loved examining that, of course, and sisterhood, because I have many sisters, and you know, but with and of course, Wallace is by far the best character to write, because she is so funny to me and so irreverent and just rude, but also honest, right? And perceptive. And that's another journey that goes from the beginning to the end of that day to when Elle finally sits with her mother at the last scene together. And it's that is a big arc in the novel, is Elle and Wallace. So it's not just Elle and, you know, and these two men. It's
of course.
It's her journey with her mother and her sister, of course.
Yes.
But yeah, Wallace was so funny to write, and I hope it translates. You know, it's funny because there's a lot of things that are very culturally American, right? Of course. So I worry. That's the only thing I ever worry about with translations, is does Wallace come through? You know.
Yes. No, some things are universal, apart from the cultural and political and
horrible mothers who we love.
Wonderful, horrible mothers. Yes. What's next, Miranda?
Well, right now I'm working on HBO bought the rights to the book, and I'm working on the miniseries version of the novel.
Wow.
So I've been concentrating on that, and I'm percolating. I went back to poetry because it's like a palate cleanser for me. It gives me access to the better part of my writing, I think. The more poetical the more honest and not self-conscious. I can't be a self-conscious writer. And by the way, I had no idea what this book was going to be about. I had no plot. I had no outline. I didn't know from one day to the next what was going to happen. So, you know, I write into the dark, as they say, and that for me is really fun. I used to be terrified of the blank page, and now whenever I starting the next day, I start with a blank page, because I don't know what's coming, and that's like writing poetry, I think.
Yeah, the book is writing you. In fact,
yes,
you are not writing the book; the book is writing you.
Yeah, no, truly, and I couldn't even begin to decide, nor did I want to, who Elle was going to choose, and in fact, I didn't even know until the second to last page of the novel. I didn't know, because if I had, I would have been determining her fate, and she had to determine her own fate in a way. So that was really interesting too, to have to.
You're not a God writer.
No, no, definitely not. And also, if you think about it, if I knew, the reader would know.
Yeah.
Even if it was, because it's an unconscious thing, right? You just give it away, you know. But Elle didn't know, and I didn't either. So
it was so nice to talk to you. And
Same.
thank you very much. And we are waiting for you to come to Romania and meet your public.
I hope that I will be invited, she says.
You will definitely
One of
be.
these days. Yeah. I would love to. I'd love to meet my readers. It's
thank you.
as I said at the beginning, it really, you put a book into the world and it only belongs to your readers after that, and their experience and imaginations. And so I just absolutely love to meet readers, talk to them. I have a lot of communication on the web, on the Instagram site, and that's so meaningful to me.
Thank you again for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. This is really lovely to chat with you. So thank you so much.